Good afternoon, everyone. Morning, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation. IT organizations face the challenge of adapting and evolving their data center infrastructures to meet increased demands of storage consumption driven by mobile, cloud, big data, and social networking that is resulting in unprecedented data growth. As storage and storage management are key components of data center evolution, the requirements for efficiency, agility, productivity, and cost-effectiveness remain top of mind for IT organizations. Today's IT infrastructures leverage legacy hardware and software that does not scale well and does not perform economically and efficiently to meet the needs of the company's business objectives. Enterprise IT departments recognize the need to adapt to remain relevant as lines of business command more clout and influence and easily circumvent their internal IT departments to procure IT as a service, such as cloud or storage as a service. Today's webinar is hosted by TBR in sponsorship with Dimension Data and EMC, and we'll dive deeper into the dynamics, challenges, and alternatives that customers are facing regarding their storage infrastructure. Now, before I turn it over to today's presenter, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. This event will be recorded, and a link to the recording as well as the slides for today's webinar will be sent out, as well as a white paper written by TBR on behalf of EMC and Dimension Data. That will be sent out via Dimension Data within the next few days. And with that, I'd like to hand this over to Stan Stevens.
Justin, thank you very much. As Justin mentioned, my name is Stanley Stevens. I'm a senior analyst for TBR, focused on data center infrastructure, primarily with a concentration on storage. I'm joined today by Matthew Mendoza, Senior Product Manager for EMC, along with Stuart Fox, Global Director of Dimension Data. And over the next 30 minutes, we're going to really cover how you can gain more control of your storage infrastructure more cost effectively. For today's agenda, I'm going to cover the introduction. We'll go through some market transformations, some of the challenges that are fueling these transformations, and some answers or alternatives that we see out in the marketplace today, especially around software-defined storage. Be joined by Matthew Mendoza from EMC. We'll talk about an interesting alternative around software-defined storage and the innovation and investments that EMC has made to address the challenges that they were hearing from their customers, and specifically focus on Viper, the unique software-defined storage platform from EMC and the value prop that it delivers to customers. And then we'll close it out with Stuart Fox talking about really what are the life experiences out there today. Stuart will concentrate on a client case study and really the methodology that Dimension Data utilized to help this client as they had to muddle their way through some of the challenges they were experiencing and the value that the combined service that Dimension Data and EMC offer to the marketplace and specifically to this customer. Turn it back to me for some conclusion, some Q&A. And throughout the presentation, we ask that we'll have some survey questions that will really help us. We ask if you could take the time to go ahead and fill those out as we put them up on the screen. We appreciate that. Let me start out really by talking about the market dynamics that are driving, impacting, and complicating how organizations are addressing storage. And I call these market dynamics because certainly they're trends, drivers, things that IT organizations and especially storage admins have been facing for some time as well as continue to face. Starting with virtualization. And really with virtualization, this notion that as you virtualize, you're going to be more cost effective, more efficient. However, as we talk to customers, that may be true moving forward as they were moving more into virtualization. But in the very beginning, when they're creating virtual machines and desktops, and they were starting to roll these out, and there was more VM sprawl, virtualization was creating some additional complexities, some additional costs, some additional things that customers really didn't budget in the beginning. So when we were asking customers, were they really receiving value in virtualization? They were receiving some value, but from a complexity and burden perspective, they were still challenged with some of those burdens. And certainly a burden was faced on storage, not just virtualizing the virtual machines and the desktops, but also the notion of now you have to take storage, try to make it a little bit more cost effective and easier to maintain and deploy. And so there's notion of storage virtualization. Second area is big data and analytics. And certainly as the adoption of digital and social media became more prevalent, It introduced additional challenges to storage. Metadata, if you will, introduced the need for object storage. And as you're consolidating and bringing forth not just big data analytics and bringing in more virtualization into your infrastructure, certainly looking at different methods like unified storage. And again, all of the challenges there behind the management and the processes and the back-end processes that you have in trying to address these types of dynamics. Further magnified when you're taking a look at cloud computing, and whether it's public cloud, private cloud, hybrid IT, this notion that now you're taking a virtual environment through automation and orchestration, you're able to now turn your virtual environment into a cloud or utilize a public cloud to offload some of your workloads. Well, certainly, as you continue to move forth, that was putting more pressure on the storage environment, more pressure on things like storage management, and really bringing forth this notion of a newer method or technology to address the complexities of storage management through things like software-defined storage. One more piece is further magnified by hybrid IT and the fact that with lines of businesses and departmental autonomies, being able to move towards an as-a-service offering, it really put more and more burdens and complexities, again, not only on the overall infrastructure, but on the storage component as well. What are some of the barriers that are out there now as you're going through all this transformation, as you're looking at virtualizing your environment, as you're addressing big data and analytics, as you're moving towards a private cloud or utilizing public cloud for some of your non-critical workloads? You've got some barriers that customers are facing. With all of that, you had storage growth and the increased demand of storage and for storage as you were moving more and more through these dynamics. So I mentioned cloud, big data, social networking. How do you continue to not just reactively but proactively address the storage growth? How do you make sure that you're doing that cost effectively, efficiently, and not adding additional burdens to your staff? The second barrier, storage management. How do you take these multiple platforms? Again, as you were transforming your infrastructure, as you were embracing virtualization, as you were embracing and having to support big data applications, cloud computing, hybrid, how were you managing the different platforms that were out there today, whether you were utilizing storage based on network attached, direct attach, whether it was block and file object? You really were facing a complicated approach to how do I manage all of this infrastructure without having to place additional burdens, require additional skill sets, and really break down the silos that were being formed and having to address and adapt and embrace all of these transformations. Another key area is certainly around the planning and the ability or inability in this case to proactively plan. Again, if you're in a reactionary mode, and we've talked to a number of customers that were really more in a reactionary mode, getting more and more workloads being thrown at them and more data being created that's happened to be stored, they had their hands full just being able to gather and manage the storage performance matrix and being able to really do any type of capacity planning. It was, in a lot of cases, almost next to impossible to keep up with this. And then the last barrier is this, again, I mentioned it previously as part of a dynamic, the departmental autonomy, the inability to map storage utilization back to the lines of businesses for any type of accountability as well as chargeback. We talked to a number of customers that aren't there today right now with respect to bill back or chargeback, but they certainly want to be able to hold lines of businesses accountable for the amount of storage that they need to utilize on the infrastructure today. And again, all of this, again, is driving the cost and the complexity up rather than bringing it back down and bringing it more in line to what the goals are for most IT organizations. So let's look at an alternative, and certainly there's a lot of hype out there today around what I call an emerging technology. Certainly it's been talked about for years, but it's gaining more and more market traction. Some folks believe it's a reality today. Most customers believe it's still in a hype cycle, and that's software-defined storage. What's interesting is, there is no set standard in place for software-defined storage. So definitions, architectures, all of that can be very, very confusing. As close as we come to a definition right now is around SNIA. And SNIA has a framework and basically defines software-defined storage as the abstraction and simplification of network storage management. Well, the reason why I mentioned in the beginning about virtualization and this notion of virtualizing not just machines and desktops, but storage, is because, again, there are vendors out there. There are some vendors out there that through their architectures were providing storage virtualization and abstracting the storage management, still part and parcel, part of the hardware, but separate in the form of being able to access that and access a lot of the back-end processes through a GUI, if you will. Some of the proposed goals for SDS are the ability to provide a heterogeneous multi-vendor management environment. So this notion of being able to go out there and whether you're deploying legacy environment, whether the legacy storage is from a single vendor or multiple vendors, that is the promised goal, is to be able to go out there and manage legacy as well as new storage. Storage could be, a traditional arrays, if you will. It could be based on commodity off-the-shelf type of architectures. But again, the goal is to provide that single pane of glass that's going to give you the ability to proactively go out there and manage. Some of the challenges of software-defined storage, as we've seen in our research, as we've talked to many vendors and partners, one is that it's not plug-and-play. Let's face it, there's still firmware required to handle essential storage administration, such as RAID assignment, such as creating the storage LUNs or volumes. That's still there. So you're still going to need some level of back-end planning, some level of back-end process and administration. You're going to need to build that into it in order to really expect and appreciate the value of a platform like software-defined storage. It's not something that you could deploy today and realize right away. Investments in storage management typically can take several years. And again, one of the keys moving forward in this webinar, you'll hear from not just EMC, from Dimension Data, how they're able to help with that out of the gate with a service that's available where they've invested in and they've been able to utilize years of experience to help with the taking care of all that back-end planning and process and administration. Another challenge is just, again, trying to map this with the rising costs and controls that impact OpEx and CapEx. Again, if you're not recognizing on your investment for several years, that's impacting, again, your overall budget. And the fact that you're buying something, and if it's taking you 2 or 3 years to recognize value on that, that's certainly impacting your numbers. Okay, what I'd like to do now is, with that, kind of turn it over to our next presenter, which is Matthew Mendoza. And what Matthew's going to do is talk about, really from EMC's perspective, how they've been able to address some of the customer challenges, some of the concepts behind VIPRE, and being able to roll out a unique capability in VIPRE. And Matthew, what I'll do is hand it over to you, and I'll hand you the presentation rights as well, so you can control the slides. So Matthew, welcome.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. So looking in this environment that we're in, EMC identified a few unique storage challenges from the operation perspective that we thought needed solving. A lot of these, we can see on this slide here, we had a lot of application complexity coming into these environments. We thought about the way that there was new storage and old storage, new types of storage with object and Hadoop and HDFS. Then we thought about how there's a lot of wasted storage, thinking about how we had oversized volumes, unoptimally allocated volumes. We really wanted to make sure we weren't wasting storage. We saw uncertain recoverability in a lot of these environments where people wouldn't know exactly if they had all their backups, if they had all the replication set up correctly, and if their applications were truly recoverable. There were opaque costs in these environments where it was hard to tell how much was an application costing me, how much could I really charge back to a customer or show back to a customer for what they were consuming in these complex storage environments. There's an increase in SLA failures, making it harder for us to get accurate chargeback because we couldn't report on these SLA failures and be really sure if we were meeting or not meeting the objectives that we had for storage performance. The performance problems were difficult to troubleshoot in these environments. They're complicated. There's multiple storage types. It's hard to understand what's happening. There's a lot of wasted effort in incidents with kind of people pointing fingers and not understanding how things are configured. And then on top of that, what everyone always knows is that there's always uncontrolled growth. And huge amounts of storage growth, especially in the unstructured data. If we look at block, there's not quite as fast growth, but when we look at object and file data, IDC is showing 53% year-over-year growth in those spaces. And so we thought that we really needed to come up with a way to handle all of these challenges across all the storage types that we see out there today. So we've developed a few products that help with this. The first is Viper Controller. So let's talk about some of the features that Viper Controller has and how we think that kind of helps with the software-defined storage strategies that customers have today. So what we want to do is we want to abstract away the physical resources. So Viper is going to become a single layer for management that you'll have on top of all your heterogeneous storage environments. It's going to pool those heterogeneous resources together, allow you to manage them simply and efficiently in virtual pools made up of multiple arrays, even from different vendors. We're then going to automate the storage services. These will be policy-based automations where you can do full end-to-end allocation of devices from the storage side all the way up into a host, automated by Viper based on policies you configure. We're going to integrate out of the box with multiple platforms across the southbound storage side and then the northbound automation side, so into VMware, into OpenStack, and into Hyper-V. There's going to be self-service for the users that you have. We'll be able to self-serve storage allocations. It comes with a self-service portal that users can use to request storage services from these software-defined storage arrays. And it's intelligent. It creates repeatable best practices that we have so that you don't have to worry if someone's going to make a mistake during an allocation, and we remove that human error that we see today. It's very flexible to manage all the EMC platforms as well as all the third-party storage platforms, and it's always developed to be open. So we have REST-based APIs to make it simple to integrate into any other platform, and we've also recently released an open-source version of Viper called Copperhead that's available free on the internet. It's fully open-sourced. On the other side of that, we have Viper SRM, reporting and management of these complicated environments. And we think of some of the challenges that we introduce into storage environments by creating software-defined storage. It becomes more opaque, it becomes harder to manage, it becomes harder to troubleshoot. And so Viper SRM helps alleviate all of those problems. We're going to visualize your application and infrastructure mapping so you still understand where an application is running and how it maps down to the physical storage, even through these software-defined layers. We're going to make sure we can trend application performance so you understand how your applications are performing and know if the software-defined storage you have is going to be able to meet the needs of them going forward. We'll help with troubleshooting infrastructure issues across these opaque allocation chains. So even if you have virtualization layers and even if you have software-defined storage layers, it's still very easy to troubleshoot any performance problems you might have. Again, always being heterogeneous, managing across EMC and third-party storage. We'll then provide you with some ability to pull some of those charges back. So with chargeback, we allow you to see exactly how much storage an application is using across this landscape. Provide detailed chargeback reports which tell you how much you're using for primary storage, replicated storage. We'll report on all the utilization and configuration, so understanding both the arrays that make up your software-defined infrastructure and also the software-defined constructs on top of them. We'll create compliance rules that will help you meet your SLAs across these more complicated environments. And then we'll help you optimize these environments so you can really understand where is my storage, where do I have space, and where do I want to allocate things in the future. And so when we think about this landscape, it's a pretty complicated space. We have these new workloads, commodity, HDFS, really growth in object storage, and scale-out block and elastic block. So we have some offerings through Viper Services for object and HDFS. We have the ECS appliance, which is built on Viper Services, which provides HDFS and object as well. And we have a scale-out block with the scale-out offering. So looking at the commodity management with Viper. And then on the right side, we have traditional infrastructure, managing EMC arrays and third-party arrays with Viper Services and Viper Controller, and then providing Viper SRM to report on all of this to run those workloads you think about as today's workloads, SAP, Oracle, and Microsoft. So this is the landscape that EMC has for software-defined storage solutions. I think now we'll turn it over to Dimension Data to talk a little bit about how they're using some of these technologies and how they're positioning them in the market with their customers.
Okay, so before I turn it over to Dimension Data, I believe we have a poll question that we're going to send out. And this is our first poll question. And the poll question really is, are you concerned about managing legacy technology and disparate storage platforms or data center storage sprawl that require multiple management tools? We'll leave this open for a few minutes. It'll be up on the side. I think it's a good way to understand how many folks out there today have this type of concern. With that, I'm going to go ahead and segue over to Stuart Fox. Stuart's going to really talk about, as I mentioned in the beginning, some of the real-world experiences that they have in working with a customer and how they've been able to help. So does he have to drag it over? Okay, we're just giving Stuart presentation rights right now. So Stuart, I'll go ahead and put it on the next slide, and you now have control.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stan, and thanks, Matthew, for sharing us with some of the insight there. This is really interesting. Stan shared with us earlier some of the trends being observed across the market and some of the drivers, that are being associated with these. He also shared with us how this is impacting storage and some of the barriers within the storage environment that's hindering the acceleration of some of those trends as well. EMC2 identified the same challenges and developed the enabling technology for us to break down these barriers. And what I'd like to do now is to share with you how Dimension Data has deployed this technology to help our clients break through these barriers and accelerate their ambitions. Now, prior to relocating to the United States a couple of months ago now, I spent the past 5 years leading our data center business unit across Asia Pacific based out of Singapore. And what I'd like to do is share with you one of the clients I work with closely, who is a global steel manufacturer with their Asia Pacific headquarters based in Singapore, and whose ambition was to move from selling products to become a solution provider, what they like to call effectively providing steel as a service to their customers. To do this, they realized they needed to reduce their total cost of IT operation and transform their IT, thus allowing IT to shift its focus from managing and operating the infrastructure to delivering true value to their business. Their IT environment is perhaps quite typical of many and possibly much like yours. They have a heterogeneous IT infrastructure full of servers, some virtualized, some bare metal, storage for a range of manufacturers, network backup, and so on. And of course, it's all there to support the business applications. They too had minimal adoption of ITIL processes, and they had limited functionality from their tools. They had initiated an exercise some time ago to build out the processes for their operation and bought some tools in the belief that would help them build efficiencies and improve the service quality. But what they actually found was this meant redirecting the existing resources to develop those processes and to learn and customize all the tools. And this actually took way, way longer than they'd expected and meant less people actually focused on the service operations, and the whole project was still a work in progress a year or two down the track. In addition, there was a high volume of manual tasks, tasks that were performed by people completing checklists by hand, sometimes with errors, as you can imagine, with the people doing the same thing over and over again. Sometimes they can only do those once a month because the time that was available to them, sometimes it was skipped. And they also suffered from high employee attrition, all which added to their existing service operation challenges and application availability issues. One of the biggest challenges in their IT infrastructure was their storage environment. And as we know, right, storage doesn't exist in a silo. It's an integral component of the IT infrastructure and is interconnected to critical domains affecting things like performance, availability, and service delivery, which are all key to delivering business value. When we consider the cost of storage environment, we also find that capital expenses for storage account for only about 20% of the cost. A third is spent on supporting infrastructure such as networking, telecoms and power, while a staggering 50% of the cost is spent on staffing and storage software. So it's obvious that adding more people and resources to try and focus on resolving these aforementioned issues is definitely not the answer. So how did Dimension Data help them? Well, for the greatest impact and shortest time to value, we focused on 3 areas. The first, the automation of storage management processes to reduce the cost of operation in a short duration. From experience, automation can result in a 50% decrease in manual tasks, up to 2/3 decrease in mean time to repair, and an average of 30 to 40% increase in operational efficiencies. Benefits of automation also extended to scalability with virtual engineers being able to address peak loads at unlimited scale without errors or fatigue, and improved governance and compliance with detailed logs and audit trails and alignment to the ITIL framework. The second greatest area of impact was the optimization of storage technology using a consumption model for faster time to market. The focus here was providing a modular platform which interoperated with existing tools, integrated with multiple vendors, technologies, and required a less than 90-day transition timeframe to full deployment. And thirdly, we believe we could help them maximizing their application availability and performance with seamless integration services, high applications availability monitoring, automated health checks, and the automation of their pre-approved service requests without the need for that human intervention was really key here. The intelligent storage management was enabled through the adoption of Dimension Data's managed service for storage. And that service allows our clients to focus on enabling business value by offloading the day-to-day operations and regaining focus on strategic innovations, all whilst maintaining that asset and architectural ownership and having that single point of accountability. It provides efficiency through increased service levels and cost management, improved operations of multi-vendor technology environments, and it allows the management of the network, server, and storage environments, whether on-premise or in the cloud. And because it's also built on the ITIL service operation framework, it inherently drives process efficiency within those existing service operations. Proactive monitoring and management is delivered through Dimension Data's global service centers and complemented by local expertise. This provides a consistent level of client support and client experience worldwide. There are a few key tool sets within our managed services platform here, and EMC's Viper platform is at the very heart of our managed service for storage offering. As Matthew described earlier, the technology allows us to do things like enable the management of heterogeneous storage environments, anything from third-party arrays across to cloud storage. It allows us to abstract physical storage resources into a single virtual pool of storage. It allows us to automate provisioning by creating policy-based virtual storage pools with predefined storage capabilities, as well as present users with a catalog of storage services, reduce the provisioning times from weeks or days to mere seconds. And this in turn allows us to track assets, review storage trends, and manage capacity utilization. It allows us to really plan for the future capacity requirements and provide the billing and chargeback services. So let's get back to our client, right? They needed to reduce their total cost of IT operation. They needed to transform their IT and shift their focus to delivering true value to their business. They were experiencing the same barriers in their storage environment that we talked about earlier that led to a rising cost and increasing complexity. Dimension Data used EMC's Viper technology as an enabling technology and used this as part of a managed service to resolve the client's challenges. So did we deliver? Well, absolutely. Our client achieved a 60% reduction in the mean time to recovery, a 0% error rate on automated tasks, and a 30% increase in IT efficiencies. They moved to a consumption-based financial model and achieved all this in less than 90 days. And as a result, our client accelerated their ambition, transforming their business from selling products to providing steel as a service. Thank you, and over to you, Stan.
Okay, thank you very much, Stuart. What I'm going to do now, that was great information, and before we get into Q&A, I want to go ahead and just touch upon a few things. But as I'm talking, before I get into it, we're going to send out another series of questions, poll questions that we'd just like to get your feedback on. And before we get into Q&A, I just want to round it out again by going back to the beginning and really making sure that, a couple points that we touched upon today is there are a lot of dynamics that are pushing IT organizations today that are affecting storage. There are some alternatives. Certainly, there's a lot of hype out there for software-defined storage. One of my questions back to Matthew is going to be certainly, software-defined storage today is still pretty complex. There is a lot of back-end. From our perspective, there are platforms out there, certainly VIPR is one of them, that is ahead of the pack as far as what it can deliver and what it can do. So certainly, taking a look at a software-defined alternative, you really have to stop and consider a lot of aspects to that before you dive into it. It's simply not totally plug and play. Again, depending on the complexity of your infrastructure. So, the one thing I want to go back to Stuart and to Matthew, if you can share it, is I'm assuming that your efforts regarding the solution took some time. I'm sure you just didn't get together a month ago and say, we want to put together this intelligent managed service, and away we go. Stuart, do you have any insight as to, and maybe you don't, but just insight into the type of both resource investment that it might have taken Dimension Data working with EMC to really put forth this type of architecture and this type of solution before you made it available to the marketplace? Was it an easy task? Was it a task that took a little bit of time? I believe in working with Dimension Data, you did put a lot of effort into the back end and really making sure that this was a streamlined effort as you rolled it out to your clients.
Yeah, so thanks, Stan, for the question. Look, I think an implementation like this in any environment, whether it be a Dimension Data or a large enterprise client, takes a considerable amount of time. To share some of the sort of statistics that from our implementation, it's cost us about $10 million worth of investment to build this platform. That's a round figure, but it's similar to sort of the time and the investment rather that organizations of similar sizes spend to build out a similar platform. In addition to that, it's taken us about 18 to 24 months to build it out to a point where we can deliver these services to a client where they can realize that time to value within a time frame of less than 90 days. So really, we've taken that investment, we've built it out so our clients can benefit from a result, both from, as you can see, some of the results on the screen for this particular client, but also the cost side as well.
Thanks a lot, Stuart. Hey, Matthew, I want you to keep me honest. I mean, again, from TBR's perspective, we look at the broad market, and so I don't want to put you on the spot as it relates to VIPR, but if you do have any competitive intelligence or experience out there today, am I making fair statements that software-defined storage, especially if it's your complex environment, they aren't truly plug and play? I mean, it does take some of the back end that Stuart's talking about, and some of the other platforms that are out there today certainly could take more back end hand-holding, if you will, around process and planning than what might expect. Do you agree with that? Do you have insight into that based on, I'm sure you've taken a look at some of the competitors that are out there today that EMC faces?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So I think one thing that I've noticed in working with VIPR and looking at our competitors' tools is that while there is some complexity in the back end and getting these things set up, they're not just plug and play, that much more of the time is spent in changing business process. Because what software-defined storage enables is agility and speed and self-service. And to change your business process to handle things like a self-serve portal or to have chargeback on that storage you've allocated, those type of business changes seem to be much harder for companies to swallow than the technology.
Thank you very much. Folks, we're going to start opening it up for Q&A. We have some questions in the queue already. For those of you that are dying to ask a question, there is a Q&A tab. Please feel free to go ahead and submit your questions, and the panelists and I will do our best to address and answer those. We do have one question that I'd like to open it up to either Stuart or Matthew to answer. I certainly can as an analyst, but I'd like to get your take on it. It's what business metrics are linked to software-defined storage? I believe we covered some of them, but if you have some specific metrics based on your experience that you want to share?
Sure. Look, let me take a first cut at that, Stan. Look, I think we've got them on the screen here, right? These are some of the areas from an IT service operation that we track. So here it's really about increasing the IT efficiencies, automating, driving the automation in those environments. And it's also around aligning the optimization of storage technology using that consumption model for faster time to market. So really it's around how do you understand the business challenges, the business priorities, and therefore how can you then go and create value, and what does that flow on through in terms of the service operation of that client's environment. Maybe, Matthew, you'd like to add something specific to software-defined storage or the EMC Viper technology specifically?
Yeah, I think one other one to think about is compliance to service levels that you have. So as you move to a business-focused model, you usually have service-level agreements with your customers, and so I think the business metric of how well do I comply to those objectives that I have is key.
Stuart, I have a question. Certainly there are other service options available through other competitors of yours. And certainly some of those might be through relationships with companies like EMC. Can you share with the audience sort of what you haven't touched upon would make a more unique value, if you will, in dealing with the solution from Dimension Data versus some of the offerings that are out there today from competitors?
Sure, love to, actually. I mean, it's quite interesting because a lot of people talk about providing managed services, and certainly some of the conversations where the clients talk about or where vendors talk about, acquire certain tool sets to implement in your environment, and you can realize those savings. But what a lot of clients found, including this particular client, is they went down that path and they acquired those tool sets, those services, and they actually ended up redirecting resources off their existing business to go and learn how those worked, to build out more of those processes, and they actually found that actually took a lot longer than they expected, as well as taking time away from the business. So what we've tried to do is really come from a client perspective. How do I really reduce that time to value? So instead of the 18 months, how do I get really down to less than 3 months? How do we really address things around, how do we use things like automation to our advantage? Very much around how do we scale using virtual engineers to address those peak loads at unlimited scale? How do we do things like improve governance and compliance with detailed logs and audit trails? And how do we really reduce those manual tasks? So what's really important for the business is for the folks in IT to be focused on what's important to the business rather than maintaining the service operation. So let us take that away for you and let us help you with that, so you can repurpose some of those people or refocus them and help in those ways.
Is there any specific examples as to how, I know you just mentioned they've been able to maybe reallocate resources. Are there any specific examples in working with your clients? As an example, I'm wondering, with this approach, it's made them certainly more strategic, if you will. Are there other areas that they've been able to dive into that have helped them to be either more competitive or more successful that they weren't able to be prior to deploying this type of service with Dimension Data? Are there any specific examples you might be able to share or no?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if I use this example, it's in front of us again, right? I mean, this organization used to sell, reinforced steel products to their customers. And it was a very transactional type sale. And what they realized is for them to increase their profitability, for them to increase revenue from existing clients, for them to increase client satisfaction, and for them to create a unique differentiator in the market, they need to move to providing, what they call steel as a service, just-in-time delivery, just-in-time implementation of all those solutions in a different financial model. For them to do that, they need IT to change and for IT to focus on the business rather than the service operation. So that's where we really came in here, and we focused on how do we provide those efficiencies through automation, through greater levels of governance, and through the optimization of storage technology with a consumption model so they could go and do that.
Interested to find out on the adoption rate. I know this is fairly new, I believe, as far as the service, if I recall. Are you seeing more traction in specific geos right now than others, or is it kind of across the board right now?
Yeah, so we announced this service to the public beginning of May at EMC World in Las Vegas. It's a global offering, and it's available globally. This is one client as an example where we have the implementation. Okay, so if I look at this, really, it's we've got this particular client on board, and they're using the services. We have a couple of proof of concepts that are being considered by a couple of clients right now. One here in the US that we're working with very closely, because they're really trying to say how do they get those benefits back into their business, and how do they really help IT transform. We've got examples in Australia where they're looking at this as part of how do they optimize existing services in their organization, as well as across Europe and Asia.
Okay. I know that we're coming up to 10:45, folks. I'm going to give you another opportunity. If you have a question, to go ahead and submit them. While we're waiting for maybe the last call on questions, I'm going to go ahead and give Matthew and Stuart, if you want one last moment to add anything that you might not have been able to add. Certainly, this has been very informative. And what I'll also do is, if there are no other comments from Stuart or Matthew, before we conclude our webinar, I'm going to turn it back over to Justin just for some follow-up activity. So, Stuart, Matthew, either one, is there anything else you'd like to add before we go ahead and head to the conclusion part of our webinar?
My only suggestion, or my only not ask, I suppose, offer is that if anybody has any questions or would like to explore this further, or would like to deep dive into some of the examples that we've shared today, feel free to reach out to myself. My contact details are on the deck there at the very front, and I'm certainly available on social media or email.
Okay.
And this is Matthew. Just to let everyone know, we do have EMC vLabs available for both of the Viper products as well. So if anyone wants to just see what the tool looks like in real life and be able to poke around, they're both available on EMC.com.
Okay. Very good. So I don't see any more questions. What I'm going to do is turn it back over to Justin, who's just going to, again, wrap it up and talk to you about how you're going to be able to get some of the